We're continuing with Werner Schober of Sec Consult. They also have a booth outside, so if you want to know more about Sec Consult, drop by there and say hi. And this will be a talk about privacy,
right,
or the desired lack of privacy. I'll not spoil any more things on that, because you'll see that. This is the Internet of Dildos, a long way to a vibrant future. Please welcome Werner Schober.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. My name is Werner Schober. I'm working for Sec Consult as an IT security consultant, and besides penetrating all the things, I've also been studying IT security at the University of Applied Sciences in St. Pölten. And about a year ago, I was facing quite a difficult challenge. Some people might know the challenge. The challenge was to select a topic for my master thesis. So some of you might know there are always the predefined topics from the universities. Some of them are really interesting. Some of them are not that interesting, at least for me. And the interesting topics are taken very fast by the students. And I thought, I don't want to stress myself. I'm going to select a topic by myself. So the difficult part is to select this topic. And the first thing I did was to look at the topics my colleagues selected. I created a word cloud out of their thesis titles, so we basically have everything there. We have the GDPR, the blockchain, bitcoins, threats, cyber. So nearly all of the important topics in IT security in the year 2018, but one topic is missing, and that's the Internet of Things. So I don't have to explain the Internet of Things to you. We're basically building computers into everything which was analog a few years ago. We're interconnecting those devices with each other. And even worse, we connect those devices over the Internet. And I thought maybe I could combine my knowledge I gathered at Sec Consult with the Internet of Things and conduct a penetration test in the Internet of Things. The next difficult part is to select one proper subcategory of the Internet of Things to conduct a penetration test, because there are millions of devices and subcategories, and I just have to write one thesis. So I selected 4 devices. I pre-selected them. So for example, the smart coffee machine. I'm an IT guy. Coffee is very important for me, so I thought it would be quite useful to buy a smart coffee machine and conduct a penetration test on it. Or the smart or robotic lawnmower. I have quite a big garden back in the rural area in Austria. I really don't like to mow my lawn. Would be perfect situation to buy a smart lawnmower. Or the Internet of Things in buildings like light bulbs or the Nest thermometers would be also quite interesting to take a look at those devices. But those devices have 2 problems. So first of all, if vulnerabilities are found in those devices, the impact is not that huge. So if the coffee machine is hacked and it's not working, yeah, you can just go downstairs and make the coffee by yourself, or you can go out into the garden and mow the lawn by yourself. So I thought maybe I should conduct a penetration test on products in the Internet of Things which would affect our daily lives directly, or important assets of our daily lives, like our kids. So there is a lot of research going on. For example, there is the doll Kyla. You may have heard of that doll. It's basically a doll with a built-in microphone. And someone found out that the recordings are sent to some dubious servers in some dubious countries. And even the BSI said that, yeah, it's like an illegal telecommunication device and it has to be destroyed. Or the pacemaker from the company St. Jude Medical, that's the biggest pacemaker manufacturer in the world. They built a pacemaker which can be basically programmed over Bluetooth. But they forgot that authentication might be quite important. And the last device which would affect our daily lives or important assets of our lives would be like baby monitors. A colleague of mine, Matthias Frank at Sec Consult, did a lot of research on baby monitors, and he found already a lot of critical vulnerabilities. So as we can see, when it comes to categories in the Internet of Things, which would have a lot of impact when someone would find vulnerabilities in those products. There's already a lot of research going on. So I was sitting at home and I thought, which category exists in the Internet of Things where there is not a lot of research going on, but when somebody finds critical vulnerabilities that would have a massive impact. And I was sitting at home, the deadline was getting closer, I was brainstorming with myself, and then suddenly it came to my mind, there is one existing category which is really interesting, and that's the Internet of Dildos. So we basically integrate sex toys, or then smart sex toys, into the Internet of Things. We interconnect those devices with each other and over the Internet. And you might now think this is something that exists since 1 or 2 or 3 years, but that's not true. There is a long history concerning the Internet of Dildos, and it goes back until the 1970s. And before I'm going to talk about the vulnerabilities I identified while penetrating the Internet of Dildos, I'm going to talk about the history of the Internet of Dildos. So as always, when there is new technology invented, it first appears in movies. So some of you guys might know those movies. We have Barbarella, Flash Gordon, or Orgasmo. Those are movies from about the 1970s. And they already had a basic idea of the Internet of Dildos. So for example, at Barbarella, the evil guy invented a device called the Orgasmotron, which was used to cause so much arousal in humanity that the people are getting killed. So it was not a device for pleasure, but for mass destruction. The same applies to Flash Gordon and Orgasmo, so the devices in the Internet of Dildos was most of the time used as a weapon of mass destruction or for evil things. So a few years later, about 3 or 4 years later, a guy called Ted Nelson, you might know him, he's a technical philosopher, wrote the book. And in this book, he coined a term called teledildonics. So that's basically an area of research for the whole Internet of Dildos. And it just existed because the category got that important that he invented this term. He also coined terms like transclusion and virtuality. You might know those terms. And this term, teledildonics, appeared the first time in a book from Ted Nelson called Computer Lib Dream Machines. I can really recommend this book. It's quite interesting. And in this book, he basically interviewed people who had very innovative inventions or did very innovative research for that time, but the technology was just not ready yet to build those devices. And he did an interview with a guy called Hal Waxpress. Hal Waxpress is a really interesting guy. He did research in time travel via quantum tunneling and atom optic or free-flying magnetic levitators. But, and that's the interesting part, he did research in tactile entertainment invention. So it's quite interesting. He tried to talk about the real facts he was going to invent. And when you search a little bit around in the internet about Hal Waxpress, you can find a really old website. And when you dig a little bit deeper, you can see that he's still looking for a manufacturer to make and sell his sonic stimulator. So there is also a transcript of his radio dildo, as he likes to call it. So it's basically a radio with 2 outputs. One output is redirected to headphones, which are attached to a human life form, and the other output is connected to the sonic stimulator, which is inserted from below into the human life form. And there is even a patent existing, which you can find in the Google patent search. It's from 1973, and it's amazing how he tried to talk around the facts he's really trying to describe, and have to read that out loud because it's so funny. He wrote, random or controlled electronically synthesized signals are converted to sound waves that are directly coupled to the skin of a human life form, such as a human body, for example, to stimulate the skin or internal portions of the life form. So quite a funny sentence he wrote there in the original patent. Okay, so that's what happened in the 1970s and 1980s. The technology was just not ready yet. Computers were huge. It would be really awkward to build a teledildonics device at that time because it would be like as big as a room. But now in 2018, the technology is ready. and we are now ready for a penetration testing the Internet of Things. But before I'm going to talk about the vulnerabilities, I have to tell you something about the test devices, because they're also really important. So when I searched for my first test devices, I thought, yeah, I'm going to buy the test devices which are quite good sold at the online stores like Amazon. I did a lot of research. My search history is destroyed, completely destroyed since this time. I'm still getting emails from Amazon that I should buy some random dildos or sex toys. But it was worth it because I was able to select 3 proper devices. On the right side, we have the Vibratissimo Panty Buster. That's the real name, it's not a joke. In the middle, we can see the Magic Motion Flamingo. It's also obvious why it's called Flamingo. And on the left side, we have the Real Love Lydia. And the device in the middle and on the left side have one thing in common. They are both from China, and the device on the right side is from Germany. And I have to admit, I was a little bit biased at the time because I thought, yeah, I'm going to take first a look at the Chinese devices because I will find most of the vulnerabilities at the Chinese devices, of course, because the German product is a German quality product, and there might be just some, yeah, low risk vulnerabilities. So, question to the audience, who thinks that most of the vulnerabilities were found in the Chinese devices? Raise your hand. Okay, who believes that most of the vulnerabilities were found in the German device? Who thinks that there are vulnerabilities in all of those devices? Yeah, you're basically correct. But when I first took a look at the German device, I found so many critical vulnerabilities that I just wrote my whole thesis about this one product. The Vibratissimo Panty Buster is just one device out of a whole product line. It was just the cheapest device in this product line, so I bought it because it's just not important for my research. If it's like an expensive, like huge and massive dildo, or just this small device. The basic functionalities that you're able to control this sex toy via Bluetooth or Android app. But there is way more behind that. There is like a whole social media network behind that. You have Android and iOS apps, you can create group chats, you can chat with other people, you can exchange images, you can create image galleries, there are group chats, video and sound control. So it's not just a remote control via Bluetooth and the web. Okay. And now we're going to take a look at the analysis. And we're starting at the high level of software, and we're going down to the hardware, and in between we're going to analyze the transport layer. So first, I'd like to start out with the software. The first vulnerability I've identified is an information disclosure vulnerability. And when we identify information disclosure vulnerability at customers, at SecConsult, most of the times the customers say, it's just an information disclosure, it's not that important, it's just a random version number, who cares? That's, in this case, definitely not true, because information disclosures can be very critical. In this case, I found a so-called DSStore file in the web root. A DSStore file is basically, to put it in simple words, the equivalent of the desktop ini at Windows is the DSStore file at macOS. So it's a metadata file which is created when you open a file or a folder, and it stores metadata to those files and folders, and also the name of the files and folders. So if somebody is able to find a DSStore file in a web root, you have basically a side channel directory listing, because you can download the file, you can decode it. Of course, there is a Python module to decode the DSStore file, and I did exactly that. I found the file, decoded it, and found the following contents in the web root. So that's basically the output of the DSStore file when it's decoded. I marked the important files and folders red. So for example, we have an example PHP, an old page PHP. So that's already quite interesting. Why is there an example PHP in an old page folder in the productive environment? There is a database folder, could be also really interesting, but the most interesting part was the config folder. Because when you navigated to the config folder, there was real directory listing enabled, and there was just one file in there, and it was a config php.inc file with the following content. So it was basically the configuration file for the database. It contained the host, the name of the database, the username, and the password in clear text. But as we can see, it's just reachable via localhost. So that's a problem. We still have to find a way how to connect to the database. And that's exactly what I did. In the next step, I tried to find so-called exposed administrative interfaces. The first thing I did was to conduct a port scan. Sadly, there was no MySQL port open, but there is this brown, orange, ugly application that everybody might have seen, and it's called phpMyAdmin, and I found exactly that in a subfolder, and I was able to connect using those credentials directly to the database. And they had access to all the tables. So there were user tables with the real addresses, messages the users exchanged completely unencrypted, images, videos stored as blobs, friendships, blacklists, so basically everything. And what hurt me the most was, at least in the year 2018, was that the passwords in the user table were stored in clear text. Okay, so in real time, about 30 minutes have now passed by, and I contacted the German Bund for the first time. I sent them a short write-up. It was a quite interesting call I got 5 minutes later, because the guy called me, I'm calling you because of those vulnerabilities. And I said, yeah, you're calling about the sex toys. And he was like, whoa, yeah, I'm calling about the sex toys. That was quite a funny call. But yeah, the manufacturer fixed those vulnerabilities. But yeah, there is one problem. I have to write the master thesis. So in this case, we are at about 30 pages for my master thesis, and that's not enough. And that's why I researched a little bit further, and I found way more vulnerabilities, and I'm going to talk about that now. So the next vulnerability I found was a so-called insecure direct object reference. That's always a problem which consists of two sub-problems. So first of all, when a user is able to upload resources to some kind of backend, most of the time, those resources are renamed to kind of a random identifier, a random file name, which should not be guessable. And if it is guessable, there should still be like authorization checks in place. That's the second problem, because if those authorization checks are not in place, one would be able to directly access those resources. And in this case, both problems applied. I was able to guess the name of all uploaded resources, and there were no authorization checks whatsoever. And I had to learn, I found this vulnerability in a quite interesting way. A user has the possibility to create galleries. You can set the password on those galleries, you can select the visibility, like nobody should be able to see it. And I created the gallery. Containing cat pictures, of course. And I saw this request, which was made when I displayed or tried to display my gallery. And I thought to myself, an ID looks interesting. I might change this ID to something else. And I had to learn the hard way, literally, that that was not a good idea. Because when I changed it to something else, I saw completely different pictures. There were no cat pictures anymore. Yeah. And the problem was just everything which is stored in the server is renamed to a global ID, and the global ID is just incremented by 1 every time something is uploaded, and there were just no authorization checks. And what you just were able to see here, that you can set a password and the visibility applies just to the app, but the pictures are just uploaded to a web server, and nobody cares there about the password or the visibility because it can just be downloaded from the web server. Okay, the next vulnerability was quite a weird case of authentication. So at SecConsult, I was already able to see a lot of different cases of authentication. Some were good, some were not that good, but in this case, that was just weird. I have never seen something like that. It was basically like HTTP basic authentication, where the username and password is sent via server header, base64 encoded, to the server to authenticate the request. But in this case, it was just, the username and password was just appended to every request in clear text, and there were no sessions. So normally, you send your username and password once to the server, and if this process is successful, you get, as a result, a token or a cookie, and you can use this token and cookie to authorize all the other requests. But in this case, yeah, it's just weird. I have never seen something like that, that you send with every single request, which writes or reads from the backend the username and password in clear text. Okay, the next vulnerability is a remote pleasure vulnerability. There is version 1.0 because there is a version 2.0 as well. I will talk about that later. So basically, in the Vibratissimo app, you are able to create quick control links. They are sent via SMS or email to strangers. You can select, of course, the email address and the phone number, and everyone who is in possession of those links is able to control the device. And there is no extra confirmation needed. And at the next slide, we will see the email and the link, which is used to control the devices. So you have this email, quick control, then you have some random ID. Yeah, and I found out this ID is not random again. It's just the same global counter again. So you can basically download the app, create your own quick control link, decrement the ID, and pleasure random strangers on the internet. Okay, and I also have a short video which demonstrates this vulnerability. So what you're basically going to see is exactly what I just explained. So the evil attacker is just connected to the LTE network. He creates his own quick control link and decrements the ID until he finds the victim device on the right side, which is connected locally via Bluetooth to the device. Yeah, some text. So, okay, this is the evil attacker. He's not connected via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth to the device, and that's the victim device, which is directly connected via Bluetooth. We even should have a sound here. Yeah, that's basically it. Okay, there are a lot of other vulnerabilities which concern the software, like cross-site scriptings, HTTPS, and outdated software, but I'm not going to talk about that because it's just your generic web application problems. I don't have to go into detail on that. So the next vulnerabilities which we're going to talk about are in the transport layer. But before I'm going to talk about the vulnerabilities, I will tell you how Bluetooth Low Energy and the security basics work in general. So basically, you can imagine that Bluetooth Low Energy works like a web API. You have endpoints, those are called service characteristics. You have properties, you can read to those endpoints, you can write those endpoints. So for example, you have a device name endpoint, you can read and write this endpoint. You have a model number string, you can read and write to this endpoint. So that's basically how Bluetooth Low Energy works. Concerning the security, we are using AES-CCM for transport encryption. That's basically considered secure. But as we all know, the security also depends on the key itself and on the key exchange. The key exchange is defined at Bluetooth as the pairing method. So for Bluetooth Low Energy, there are 5 pairing methods. We have no pairing, where the packets are basically sent into the air, and if a device is nearby and it takes the packets, and if it's if it can work through those packets, it will do something, whatever that might be. There is just works, out of band pairing, passkey, and numeric comparison. You guys know those pairing methods. So numeric comparison is when you compare some numbers. The passkey is this, which is always 000 or 1, 2, 3, 4. When you connect your phone to your car, for example, at out-of-band pairing, the key material is exchanged using NFC. And just works is also not quite secure because the key is basically just set to 0, so there is no man-in-the-middle protection at all. So we have those 5 methods. Question to the audience: what do you guys think is the Vibratissimo device using? Is it using no pairing? Raise your hands. Is it using any other more or less secure method? Yeah, exactly. It's using no pairing. So it's basically possible to just sniff the traffic in the air and try to repeat this traffic to let some random devices vibrate. And that's exactly what I did. I bought this Bluefruit low energy sniffer. It's like a monitor mode enabled Bluetooth device. I put it between the sex toy and the iOS app. I started to trigger some actions and to sniff this traffic in between. And I analyzed the traffic using Wireshark, and I found two interesting endpoints. So there is this, the first endpoint, which is used to initialize the device. You have to send that at first all the time. And then you can send values from 00 to FF to the endpoint 25 to let the device vibrate, basically. And yeah, normally it would be time for war dildoing now. I coded a small Python proof of concept, which is basically searching through the air if there are any Bluetooth low energy devices nearby. And if that's the case, it tries to find out if it's a Vibratissimo device. And if yes, it turns the plastic dong to 100%, basically. I tried that at home in the rural area in Lower Austria. It was not a problem there because there was just my device. The last time I tried it at the Vienna Privacy Week, that was not a good idea because there were like millions of Bluetooth low energy devices in the middle of Vienna. So I have just a screenshot for you. That has to be enough for today. So it basically discovered some random devices. It checks if it's a Vibratissimo device via the serial number, the MAC address, and the name of the device. And if it's able to find a vulnerable device, it just turns the device on. And as we published this research online, a discussion on Twitter arose where the people said, is this remote pleasure rape? So imagine the following scenario. Someone is using my Python proof of concept, walking through the U-Bahn in Vienna and turning on all the plastic dongs in the U-Bahn in Vienna. Would this be rape? So I'm studying IT security, so I have no idea about laws and regulations. So I contacted an attorney's office, Urbane Clinch mit Reich, and they helped me to find out if it is rape. But first off, they told me there is no law for this specific case, but in Austria we can interpret laws in different ways. So we basically found out it's not rape or sexual assault because you need violence, threats, or deprivation of liberty for that. But we have a special paragraph in Austria called, I have no idea how to translate that, it's the Pograbsparagraph. It's basically a comment to paragraph 218, and it defines that it's possible that there are unwanted sexual acts via third-party objects. So it wouldn't be rape, but it would be an unwanted sexual act via a third-party object. Okay, last but not least, the hardware. Yeah, there are two issues in the hardware. First of all, it's not possible to conduct firmware updates, but it would be necessary to conduct firmware updates to fix some of the vulnerabilities I identified. When we talked to the manufacturer, they said, yeah, it's not possible to make firmware updates for the normal user, but they can hand in their devices to do a firmware update. And I'm quite sure nobody's handing in their used devices to conduct a firmware update. And also they forgot to remove a serial debug interface in their productive environment. So it's basically possible to dump the firmware and analyze the firmware as well. Okay, and there is one more thing. So we had a lot of meetings and telephone conferences together with the manufacturer and the German Zertbund. And we had quite some interesting discussions with the German guys. And one time we discussed the remote pleasure vulnerability. So we told the manufacturer that it should just be an opt-in feature. So it shouldn't be enabled per default that everyone can pleasure you out of nowhere. And the manufacturer said, no, that's not possible because most of our customers are in swinger clubs, and you don't know beforehand who is there, and you have to allow everyone to control those sex toys. The German Zertbund tried to convince them that couldn't be true. So yeah, but in the end we concluded that there is no opt-in at a swinger club. You're always in, basically. Thank you. Are there any questions? I'm not going to recommend any specific toys.
Questions? There's enough time. Questions will not be recorded.
Thank you for the talk. One question: did you also conducted analysis of the Chinese devices?
Yes, I did some analysis on the Chinese devices, but the findings there were not that interesting. So, to be honest, some of them would be critical. So, for example, there was a private key embedded in the Android app and stuff like that, but it wasn't that interesting as with the German device. So there were vulnerabilities, of course, as everywhere, but they were not that interesting.
Was there any other database, was there any other information leakage on the database, such as GPS location of users, or how many times they use the device, anything like that that would be even more leakage?
Boo, that's a good question. I didn't search through the whole database, of course. I'm quite sure that there was no GPS location or stuff like that. Yeah. I'm not 100% sure about that because, yeah, of course, I didn't search through the whole database. But the app is not requesting GPS coordinates as well, so I guess it's not stored anywhere.
So two-part question. Part one, were there any CVEs assigned as part of this? And part two, would you be the holder of the first sex toy CVE?
Two no's to those questions. So first of all, no CVEs were assigned, but there is a project called Internet of Dongs, and they assign DVEs. So that's, yeah, you can imagine what that means. So I'm not able to request CVEs, but I could request DVEs. I still haven't done it. I don't know why, to be honest. So no, I'm not the first one who found vulnerabilities in sex toys because there is always the DV score. But I think that was the first time that also a lot of information got leaked. So most of the time when vulnerabilities are found at sex toys, it's like, yeah, someone is able to control the devices via Bluetooth. It's not authenticated and stuff like that. Yeah.
Questions?
Right. Again, thanks for the talk. Very interesting. You raised the legal question there. Question is, if there were any cases that went to court, how would you, or do you have any concept of how the legal proceedings would be, like in terms of collecting evidence and whatever? Also, I think if there were any vulnerabilities in those devices, I still wonder what named vulnerabilities would look like in the IoD. But anyway.
To be honest, yeah, it's quite easy to collect the evidence. I mean, it's not easy to find out who is the one who is controlling you, because basically everyone is able to do that. So it would be quite hard to point at some guy and say he's the one who was raping me, basically, because yeah, everyone is able to do that, and that's intended by the manufacturer. So I guess it's not easy to point someone out who basically, yeah, he raped you. I mean, he hasn't raped you, but he tried it, more or less. Yeah.
Another question.
If you look at the packaging and kind of the instructions that come with the device, was there any warning about the possibility that anyone could use it with you, against you? Nothing?
No, definitely not. So the manufacturer states officially that's an intended feature. So even Zertbund told them, no, that's not a good idea. They said, yes, it is our product. It works like that. But I'm quite sure that it's not the majority of the users which are in swinger clubs and they want that everyone can pleasure you. So that's, I don't know the numbers. It might be like 5%, but not the majority of the users.
More questions? There's still time.
So I'm not sure if I got that, but was the vulnerability with the indirect object reference to download files, was this fixed by the vendor? Because I mean, basically this is a free lifetime access to amateur porn. probably not all users are even adults of these devices.
I haven't rechecked. So the manufacturer states that it is fixed, but I don't want to touch the system anymore. Yeah. So we have to trust in the statement of the manufacturer that it is fixed. I mean, at the point of time that we contacted the manufacturer, there were like suddenly every 5 days a new update at the App Store. So at least they tried to fix something. Yeah.
Now we know why hackers in stock photos always wear gloves. More questions? Okay. So we have very sincere problems with these devices with regards to security, basic IT security stuff, with consent violations, obviously regarding legal problems, the legal problem of rape or the physical problem of rape, certainly not to be neglected here. We should not make fun of that at all, because it's
Of course.
Something very serious. Are you aware of the buttplug.io
Yes.
open source firmware
Yes, I'm aware of that.
project? Would you mind adding a note to that? Because if you are interested in building your own sex toys, this is something you want to know about.
Yeah, it's basically an open source firmware for butt plugs. You already said it. So you can modify the firmware as you want. You can implement new features. You can implement the opt-in feature, for example. So it's quite an interesting product. I think it's also derived from the Internet of Things project, but I'm not sure yet.
It's the same people.
Yeah.
And that also incorporates Tor Onion services. So
Yeah.
they really
Yeah.
make sure it's secure, it's end-to-end encrypted, it's end-to-end authenticated. They put a lot of thought in there. So you might want to check that out. So if there are no further questions, thank you very much, Werner Schober.
Thank you.